You're listening to On Reflection, the beauty podcast with a global view on beauty, hosted by me, Funmi Fetto. Today's show is brought to you by our brand partner, Paula's Choice, the scientifically proven, non-irritating, multifaceted, gimmick-free skincare brand. Later in the show, I'm joined by skincare expert Dr. Sam Bunting. We discuss the gold standard ingredients that should be in everyone's skincare arsenal. But first, required reading. Beauty news, topics and features that have caught our attention. Joining me is Jessica Defino, a writer who has contributed to numerous publications including Vogue, The Cut and Bazaar, and recently joined Teen Vogue as a beauty columnist. Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on. So we will discuss your beauty column shortly. It's called Standard Issue and essentially explores, shall we say, the questionable foundations of the beauty industry. It's actually one of the most fascinating pieces on beauty I've read in a while, but we'll come on to that. First of all, let's start with a New York Times piece that was written by Courtney Rubin. It's called All Those Products Are Making Your Skin Worse. My first thought when I read the headlines was, oh my goodness, because I know exactly what it's talking about. But for anyone who hasn't read it, please explain the crux of the piece and why you chose it.
I loved this headline when I first saw it. I said, hallelujah, finally the mainstream media is talking about this, because it's a topic I've kind of been pushing to my own platforms for a while, and it's been hard to get a bite on. Basically, we are experiencing collectively more skin issues than ever before. And when you look at the reasons why, there are so many contributing factors. It's our lifestyles, it's the pollution in the environment, but a huge contributor is the rise of skincare itself. You know, we have more products than ever before and more issues than ever before, and there is definitely a correlation there. So what I love about this piece from Courtney Rubin is that it goes into the importance of the skin barrier and how anything that disrupts the skin barrier is hurting your skin's health overall. And basically anything that you put on your skin barrier is going to disrupt it. The skin barrier is kind of this self-sufficient piece of your skin that kind of wants to be left alone. The piece goes into the importance of pH balanced products, how anything that's too alkaline might damage your acid mantle, which is part of the skin barrier. And the overall message is that, you know, more products, more problems.
One of the things that someone actually mentioned was it's not just about the pH balance, it's also due to the formulation. So how do we balance all of that?
Basically, any product that you put on your skin, whether it's pH balanced or not, is going to affect your skin's microbiome, usually negatively. Especially products that have preservatives, which is most products, like any sort of preservative. The goal is to kill bacteria.
We all know, I think, as people who work within the industry, I mean, essentially, you have certain brands who bring out tons and tons of products, what seems like every week. And we know that you don't need all of those products. What doesn't help is when you see people who have a 10-step regime or a 13-step regime and they have incredible skin. People look at that and they think, well, if she has a 10-step regime or he has a 10-step regime and has such amazing skin, then surely that's the way to achieve it.
What's interesting to me about that is there are so many factors at play as to why someone might have glowing skin, and 10-step product routines are definitely not a factor. Genetics is huge. A lot of influencers and editors have great genetically strong skin, and they can handle that many products. That doesn't mean that many products is necessarily good for your health. The second thing I love to point out when that point comes up is that we collectively as an industry have completely misunderstood what healthy skin looks like. It doesn't look like this sort of plastic glass glow. What that actually is a sign of damage and a sign of inflammation. And so what happens is when you're putting products on your face and you get this immediate payoff and you're like, oh, wow, my skin looks glowy. My skin looks like glass. My skin looks like plastic. What that is in many instances is damage. So anything that makes your skin tingle or burn or all those sensations we get from acid exfoliators, that can be a sign that you are potentially damaging your skin and exfoliating living skin cells. And what happens is when that layer of our skin gets damaged, the body immediately goes into repair mode and it floods the surface of the skin with the vitamins and nutrients it needs to help repair itself. And that creates this kind of temporary flush where you're like, oh my gosh, I look amazing. And you look amazing because your body is in this damage control space.
It's interesting you should mention us having a skewed idea of what our skin is supposed to look like. I was having a conversation with someone actually just this week, and we were talking about the fascination with pores and large pores. Everyone has pores. You know, we're supposed to have pores. We're supposed to look like we have pores. But I guess we've been fed this message from society, from the beauty industry, from advertising that we are supposed to have airbrushed skin in real life, and people are terrified of pores. I mean, I'm all for democracy in beauty. If you feel that your pores are overly enlarged, and a lot of times that's actually down to wrong usage of certain products, if you feel that they need something done to them to make them much more balanced, fine. But I think there is that over obsession, and that also then leads to layering lots and lots of different types of products on the skin, which then completely erodes what you're trying to achieve in the first place.
Totally. And it's a misunderstanding of what pores are supposed to do. You know, we have this language that we use about products that it sinks into pores, it melts into your pores. Nothing is actually supposed to go into your pores. Your pores are outgoing channels for sweat and for sebum. And that's their function. Things are supposed to go out of pores. Things are not supposed to go into pores. When things get deep in your pores, that's when problems arise. Something I like to keep in mind over the obsession with pore size is that pore size is genetically fixed. There are, of course, things that can make your pores appear larger. And there are a lot of like environmental stress factors that do actually stretch out your pores. And when your pores are stretched out, you can do things to get them back to their original size. But by and large, pore size is genetic. It's fixed. It cannot be changed. It benefits the industry to make you constantly think you need to have smaller pores because it's completely unattainable and the pursuit of it never ends. It's a total marketing thing that keeps you in this consumer cycle.
I do think there's a lot to be said about formulations, though, because I think that if you're using the right formulas, you'll have less issues. At the moment, there's a lot of talk around ceramides, which is great for restoring the skin barrier. But it's interesting what this professor of dermatology at Stanford University says, and he talks about it in this piece, saying that the skin is too complex for one ingredient to do the job that we require it to do. And yet we place so much emphasis on one particular ingredient, which then says to me, well, you do need to layer the skin with lots of different ingredients in order for the skin to work in a certain way. What's your take? Do you shy away from all products completely and just let your skin do its thing?
Yeah, my take is different. I agree. You know, one ingredient may not do too much for your skin, but if you are supporting your skin's inherent functions, you don't need 10 ingredients or 15 ingredients. Your skin is already doing those things for you. So the skin has built-in functions to self-cleanse, self-moisturize, self-exfoliate, self-heal. Even ceramides, our microbiome produces ceramides. In my opinion and in my research, you know, of course, there are reasons people love skincare and want to use skincare. And in those instances, like, yes, look for the best formulations. But if skincare is starting to feel overwhelming for you and your goal is to use as few products as possible, your skin is not going to suffer for it. And in fact, it is going to get better for it because you will be empowering your skin's inherent functions and relying on your own production of ceramides and your own production of hyaluronic acid. I think there are two camps here. One is use better products and one is use fewer products.
Or use better products and fewer products. That could work. I think also one does have to take into consideration age. As you age, your skin doesn't function as efficiently. I can certainly say that about my skin. It does things in a very different way to how it did when I was, say, in my 20s, for instance. And I do think that that has an impact on how your skin behaves. But I do agree with you. I think we do need to lay off the acids. I mean, that's one of the biggest problems. You need to lay off the acids and certainly use less products. I think we're all becoming too much of an alchemist, and, we're doing all this stuff to our skin and we're just flaring up. So many people have skin issues at the moment that is simply down to their skin barrier being compromised. So I would love us to discuss the next piece. This is something that is actually quite close to my heart. It's something that I have spoken about and written about a lot. It's a piece on colorism. This particular one is by Darian Simon Harvin in Allure. Skin whitening products get a rebrand, but it doesn't erase centuries of colorism.
I love this piece. I love Darian Harvin. I think she's a brilliant journalist. What I found so powerful about this particular piece is that it gets to the root of the issue that we saw when beauty brands started responding en masse in March and April to the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. And we saw these brands pledging to do better in so many ways, pledging to address racism and colorism within their own products and their organizations. And many brands said that they were going to change the names of their skin lightening and skin whitening products, especially these products that they sell overseas in Asia and Africa, the Middle East. And what this piece in Allure gets to is that changing the name of a product doesn't do anything to address the root issue, which is racism and colorism, and the fact that brands have peddled this desire to lighten your skin really for centuries. Unless we address that root issue, changing a product name is not going to help the problem.
I totally agree. I was taken aback by some of the hypocrisy that happened over the summer when the protests were happening and when there was a lot of light shed on the plight of Black people around the world. There were a lot of beauty brands that posted the black box and they pledged this amount of money and they said they were going to do this. And they said, yes, Black Lives Matter and we stand with you and so on and so forth. However, you look into their roster of products that they don't sell here in the Western world. And I think that is quite telling. The products they don't sell here in the Western world, but they do sell in Asia and they sell them in Africa. And they have names like Fair and Light or White is Nice. I mean, I've seen a lot of these products, so I know they still exist. So for me, that was quite hypocritical for them to now pledge allegiance with the Black Lives Matter movement and sentiment. And yet they are marketing and selling products that are harmful to Black people and are also feeding that insecurity about their color and the way they look and how they don't fit into a certain standard. They're feeding into that and yet pledging allegiance with them, which is just crazy to me. The changing of the name, I thought, well, yeah, that's fine. But if your formulas haven't changed and your messaging hasn't changed, then it's pointless. A name change is pointless. Yes, words are really important and they do matter and they do make a difference and they do add to the narrative of your product. But if you're still equating the lightening of skin to success and superiority, there's still a problem, right?
100%. I think this is obviously a case of systemic racism, but a case of putting profits over people. Because skin lightening, it's not good for business on some end if these brands stop selling the products altogether, because there is a demand for it that has not been specifically created by the beauty industry, but has been created by colonialism.
Yes.
And so it makes sense that these brands want to capitalize that because it is a huge moneymaker. What we need is brands to actually have a conscience and say that I'm no longer going to feed into this need. And that's when things will start to change.
I can't agree with you more. I mean, I remember having a conversation with someone who said, look, these products are being created and being sold because people want them. And I said, yes, people want them, but you have to look at the root of that. Why do people want them? Where does that go back to? Where has that come from? What is the history behind that? Why do you think it's okay for you as a brand to take advantage of a really unpalatable history and sell that to someone and take advantage of that rather than trying to change things and be much more progressive. What's wrong with you creating products that tap into women loving themselves as they are? I agree with you. It boils down to money. It's a huge market. I read that the industry was going to be worth over $30 billion by 2024. I mean, that's humongous. That is crazy. So I guess brands are looking at that and thinking, well, we can't afford to lose that money. So we can't afford to let our consciences speak for us. It has to be all about the bottom line. And that's a real shame because they're damaging a lot of people by continuing to sell these products.
Yeah, that's the other part. It's like, of course, there's the psychological damage of perpetuating this idea that to be lighter skinned is to be beautiful. But there's also the physical damage and physical side effects of some of the ingredients that create these lightening effects to think about. Beauty products marketed to women of color in general are already considered, quote unquote, more toxic or more dangerous than the average beauty product. So it's a huge storm of different issues, from the psychological damage to the physical health effects to perpetuating systemic racism because you want to make more money. And there's no quick fix, but certainly changing the name of your product is not part of that fix at all.
Yeah, I think it's a step, but I think it's a very, very tiny step. I mean, that's like a drop in the ocean, but it's one step. And I think just as we're tackling racism, we have to tackle all those other equally insidious elements around that.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thank you. Finally, let's talk about your fascinating new column in Teen Vogue, Standards Issue. The first one is titled How White Supremacy and Capitalism Influences Beauty Standards. You start off by saying, in my opinion, beauty standards are the gnarled and rotten roots of all that is wrong with the beauty industry and perhaps the world. There are some people who'd read that as hyperbole, but I'd love you to talk me through what inspired this column and why you came to that particular conclusion.
So I have been interested in sustainability in the beauty space for a couple years. And the more that I dove into sustainability, the more I started thinking beauty standards are really feeding into this unsustainable culture that we've created. And I started thinking, man, if we didn't feel that we needed so many products and so many procedures and so many practices to look a certain way, what would the planet look like? You know, how amazing would that be for the sustainability of the industry if we could just get to the root of the problem and stop feeling like we needed so many things? I started workshopping this idea of subverting beauty standards as the key to sustainability. And the more I started researching, the more I realized, wow, beauty standards are not just an issue of sustainability. There are historical references that prove that beauty standards are tools of oppression that have arisen from capitalism, from colonialism, from white supremacy, from patriarchy. And the beauty standards that we accept and look up to today are tools that reinforce things like sexism, like colorism, like classism, ableism, racism, ageism. They reinforce gender norms. And all of those things actually have health implications. They contribute to anxiety and depression. They contribute to body dysmorphia, to eating disorders, to self-harm, to low self-esteem. Like we spoke about in the piece with Allure, often these beauty standards have physical health implications as well when we turn to harmful ingredients or practices to achieve some sort of beauty standard that we think we need to adhere to in order to look and feel beautiful. So the more that I dove into this research, I realized, wow, if we could dismantle beauty standards, it would benefit the world in so many ways.
Many, I guess, would argue that that's just one piece of the puzzle. You know, if we did away with beauty standards, we won't necessarily do away with all of those isms you mentioned, as well as the anxiety and depression and eating disorders that we're seeing amongst so many different people, not just women. What would you say to that?
Oh, of course, 100%. I specifically tried to phrase it as beauty standards are a tool and they reinforce these things. They don't necessarily create these things. It's not the root of these things, but beauty standards are just another way that our society reinforces these messages that one sex is better than the other, that one race is better than the other. So no, getting rid of beauty standards is not going to suddenly change the world, but it will help change the world. It will take away one tool that these systems of oppression use to reinforce their harmful messages.
When you talked about colonialism and capitalism, I loved how you linked the two. That capitalism has based their business model on the pillars of colonialism. I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, I see the two. I did a lot of research on capitalism and colonialism. And of course, I'm not like an economic expert, but what my takeaway was is that you really can't have capitalism without a colonialist model. And really, capitalism is taking its business model from colonialism and showed how easy it is to profit off of people who are seen as lesser than and have been brainwashed to see themselves as lesser than and are constantly chasing ways to boost themselves up. So, I mean, honestly, capitalism is all about breeding insecurity within people and then convincing them that they can buy something that will make them feel less insecure.
Well, you made that point actually in your piece when you talked about the book War Paint by Lindy Woodhead, where she documents Helena Rubinstein's career. This fascinated me because it's so true. She wrote, she was the first beauty specialist to classify skin as dry, normal, and oily in the early 1900s. And she used those classifications to sell her face cream. It was then that women began to feel the normal functions of their skin, the formation of wrinkles and blemishes, production of oil, the existence of dead skin cells were wrong somehow, and that buying creams would put it right. I mean, when you think of it in that way, you kind of think, oh my goodness, you know, what we were talking about before, it's feeded into women's insecurities.
Exactly. And what was so fascinating about that particular point to me was it shows just how insidious marketing language is and how if an idea is marketed strongly enough, it becomes part of the collective consciousness and it becomes as good as fact.
I remember writing a piece about gender neutral fragrances and how the whole idea of what's a male fragrance and what's a female fragrance was all coined by marketeers. If you smell a fragrance and it has no labeling and marketing attached to it, you'll either like the fragrance or you don't like the fragrance. It's nothing to do with gender.
Yeah, that's such a perfect example of how the beauty industry reinforces gender norms. And it really affects how we feel comfortable expressing ourselves, because we feel tied to these certain norms that have just been so deeply ingrained into us from advertisements.
You did say you are here to destroy the beauty industry in order to help rebuild something better. How do you see that happening? And what is the something better that you speak of?
I said that a little tongue in cheek. I do kind of hope to destroy whatever the beauty industry has become, but I do think there is a better way to do it. And I think that just starts with awareness. So what I hope to do with the column is get consumers to start asking why and to start questioning things and to start developing their own sense of what is beautiful to them.
That's rather a perfect way to end a segment. Thank you so much, Jessica. It's been amazing having you on.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd love talking to you.
It's now time for In Praise Of. This is a segment of the show where we laud the merits of a single beauty product. This week, it's Paula's Choice 20% niacinamide treatment. Niacinamide is one of my favorite ingredients right now, and probably forever. I mean, on a superficial level, I just love that word. I love the fact that it looked so intimidating to me, and now it just kind of rolls off my tongue. Niacinamide. Okay, so on a more serious note, I love the fact that it's got so many functions. So it smooths your skin texture. It dramatically minimizes the look of enlarged pores as well as lines. Look, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with pores and lines, but if you're not happy with how yours are looking right now, this will help to refine things. But before we go any further, let me just put this out there. Not all niacinamides are created equal. Kind of look at it this way. There's a dodgy singer at the village pub, and then there's the Grammy Award megastar. They're both singers, but they're not the same, are they? So if you're going to start using niacinamide, you may as well go for something that's as good as you can get, like this 20% niacinamide serum by Paula's Choice. Basically, if niacinamides were football clubs, this one would be in the Premiership. I don't know anything about football, by the way, but hopefully you kind of get what I mean. It does all the things I mentioned, but it does it at the very highest level. It's the first ever serum to use niacinamide at such a high percentage, but don't let that scare you. It's not harsh, it's not irritating, and your face won't fall off. The texture's quite light, so it doesn't feel greasy and it doesn't clog your pores. It's actually meant to do the opposite. And it smooths out your skin, so there's none of that orange peel situation going on. What makes it even more of a powerhouse is the addition of 2 extra ingredients. 1, licorice. Licorice for me is one of the most underrated ingredients. It evens out your skin tone. And then 2, vitamin C. That's the ultimate antioxidant that leaves you with this amazing glow. I mean, it's quite a lot, isn't it? So if you ask for anything more, I don't know. I think that's just a bit greedy. So yes, niacinamide. Doesn't matter if you can't pronounce it. Just get it. Now, this week's Talking Points. My guest is Dr. Sam Bunting, skincare expert and founder of her eponymous beauty brand and Harley Street Clinic. She's known for her no-nonsense approach to beauty. She joins me today to answer some of the most frequently asked questions around skincare and ingredients. Dr. Sam, welcome to the show.
Lovely to be here.
This feels incredibly timely, actually, because the issue around skincare in terms of how many products we're using and how that impacts our skin, and to be honest, the environment, is really quite topical right now. Earlier on, we discussed an article in the New York Times around compromised skin barriers and the fact that most skincare issues are as a result of this. I wanted to ask you whether that's something that you've seen a lot in your patients.
Goodness, yes. To be honest with you, that overcomplicated approach to beauty is probably the main reason I took to social media. Every single patient I see for me gets a form to complete where they have to list all the products they're currently using. And we were seeing patients filling in these supplementary forms because there were so many products on the go all at the same time, a sort of confusing kind of concoction of things, different trends. So active space skincare over here, clean beauty over there, essential oils over there, all lacking in harmony and cohesiveness. And it's the reason I took to social media to really try to educate and inform, because I really believe that the best skin is the result of simple, clear, consistent skin behavior.
I'm finding that there is an onus now on consumers to know what they're doing in terms of skincare. We have this rise of skintellectuals and a lot of people who have become, I guess, a kind of alchemists, really, and they feel that they have the authority and the knowledge to be able to use all these skincare products. But in actual fact, I just don't think we do. I think we're claiming to know so much more than we actually do.
I think that's spot on, actually. I mean, we have a Facebook group with over 20,000 people in it, and the level of information being shared is actually quite staggering. I'm wanting to know the nitty-gritty about all the active ingredients. And I think in a way, it's great. It's consumers wanting to educate themselves. It then puts pressure on brands to be really clear and transparent about the level of active ingredients in the products. But I think the reality is it is sometimes very difficult to navigate it by yourself, to put together a routine with the right ingredients in the right percentages that work together to deliver results to solve things like problem skin. Like acne, I think, is probably the biggest disorder that leads to this kind of chaotic sort of, skincare hopping behavior.
So I'd love us to tackle 3 key ingredients that most brands and I think skin lovers are also tapping into right now. Hyaluronic acid, niacinamide, and retinols. So let's start with hyaluronic acid. Despite this ingredient being quite prevalent, there seems to be quite a lot of confusion around it. I don't know, maybe it's the word acid that throws everyone.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the word acid creates the perception that hyaluronic acid is more active than it is. Now, I have it, for example, in my moisturizer, but it's only part of the formula. It's only one piece because it's essentially a humectant. So a sugar molecule that attracts lots and lots of water molecules into it and holds them. That's what humectants do. And hyaluronic acid holds something like 1,000 times its own weight in water. So that's very helpful if you live in a humid environment where there's water to be captured by the hyaluronic acid and pulled into the skin, helping the skin stay hydrated, which means it looks smooth and bright and supple, and it's an effective barrier. But by itself, it's not effective because you need to combine it with other ingredients. We call them occlusives. So things that will actually seal the skin and help hold the water in its place. Otherwise, it tends to evaporate away. So hyaluronic acid itself, I don't find to be particularly helpful. It's just useful as part of an approach to moisturizing.
So would you suggest you use a hyaluronic acid serum, but then you seal it in with something a little heavier in order for it to work much more efficiently?
Exactly. People get quite caught up about hyaluronic acid. Is it useful? Is it helpful? And I think, yes, it can be, but it's not really going to solve problems. And I think that there's a lot of hype around it. I think sometimes an expensive price tag, which doesn't necessarily deliver in terms of the effects on the skin.
Why are some hyaluronic acid products more expensive than others? What is the difference between the two?
I think it's marketing. There is no real nuance to formulating with hyaluronic acid. It doesn't need to be packaged in a particular way. Most products are around 1% to 2%. I personally don't think you need to spend a lot of money on hyaluronic acid. And as I say, I even question the need for it as a separate standalone serum. To me, serums generally mean they contain actives with meaningful effects in terms of what they deliver on the skin. So when you talk about niacinamide, when you talk about retinol, when you talk about other acids like azelaic acid, then you're really sort of talking about things that can actually transform the skin. Hyaluronic acid can hydrate the skin, but then so can many other different ingredients. You know, glycerin, for example, is a humectant that we all know and are probably all very familiar with, has a very similar action in the skin. So I don't really encourage my patients to invest their money in hyaluronic acid serums. I think you've got lots of other ingredients that act as great moisturizing agents that will deliver just as much value and usually cost a lot less.
Wow, that is going to be news for a lot of people. Let's go on to niacinamide. So I'm obsessed with this, and I talked about this earlier.
Yes.
I love this ingredient. There seems to be a sudden influx of products with this ingredient, but it's not necessarily new, is it? Can you explain what it is and what concerns it helps to address?
So niacinamide is vitamin B3, and it's a marvelous ingredient because it's quite active. It's helpful in the treatment of fine lines, on uneven skin tone, and it's also calming of blemishes, and it's useful in rosacea. Part of its beauty is it also boosts ceramide production, so it actually strengthens your skin barrier. So it has all those lovely problem-solving effects, but it's also very kind. So we can use it quite happily in people who would otherwise struggle to use the sort of the more strong, potentially more drying active ingredients like retinol. So I will often use that in conjunction with retinoids in my acne patients. I mean, it's so gentle, you can even use it around the eye. It's one of the best ingredients for dark circles. So I'm a huge niacinamide fan. I put it in my sunscreen and my moisturizer. It's that important to me in terms of how I practice.
And I have a question here from someone actually who asked if they can use niacinamide with vitamin C. I mean, one of the great things about niacinamide is that essentially it can be used with lots of other ingredients. But what's the best way to use that? Do you use niacinamide first? Do you use vitamin C second?
There was some confusing information put out by a brand around the vitamin C niacinamide story, and it was based on an old clinical study, and it suggested that two things were incompatible. But in modern formulations, conditions we tend to use them, the skincare products, the way they're formulated now, there's absolutely no problem. And in fact, their activity is very complementary. They work really well together, particularly in pigmentation-prone skin. The beauty of niacinamide is you can literally put it in almost every product. It goes well in a sunscreen formulation. It doesn't disturb the filters. You can put it in a moisturizer. So it's a great team player. There's very little incompatibility with any of the other active molecules that we're using in skincare now. And almost every skin concern can benefit from it. So yeah, huge niacinamide fan here.
Most people I know are either too terrified of retinols to use them or are using them incorrectly and then become terrified of them. I think a lot of this might be down to a lack of understanding, although there has been a lot of talk about formulas that are less harsh or easier to get along with. I would love you in the first instance just to explain what retinol is and the effect it has on skin.
So retinol is probably the most well-known of the retinoid family. It's a vitamin A molecule, and it's available over the counter in many products now. Vitamin A, we know an awful lot about. So the original retinoid was something called tretinoin or Retin A. It's actually a prescription grade retinoid. And that's basically the active form of vitamin A in our skin naturally. And it was discovered that tretinoin, which is a prescription version of vitamin A, had all these amazing effects. So it is one of the best solutions for acne because it stops the skin from forming comedones, which are those little blocked pores, which is basically how every single spot starts. And it's an amazing anti-ager. They literally have the potential to affect every facet of skin physiology. They speed up cell turnover. They make the skin make more collagen and elastin. They improve the circulation, and they help with pigmentation too. So I'm a huge advocate of retinoids because they really are the most potentially transformative of all the skin ingredients that we use. I use them on my younger patients in acne, and then those who start to transition into sort of being more anti-aging concerned. Retinol is, I'd say, the most commonly known in the cosmetic space. There's a whole variety of different molecules. There's retinaldehyde. There's a new one called granactive retinoid. There's retinol retinoate. So I think it's because there's so much noise in that space that it does make it very hard for the consumer to go like, well, where do I start? And, and there is a lot of talk around potential side effects.
If you're completely new to retinol, where do you start? And also, at what point do you start? Is 20 too young to start using retinols?
So let's think about the age thing first. So I think if you are a 20-something with a concern such as breakouts, even if it's just, the odd spot before your period, but it bothers you, I think that's an indication to start a retinoid. If you're pigmentation prone, I think that's a time to consider using a retinoid. And even if it's just those first fine lines around the eyes that tell you that you've had quite a bit of UV exposure already, I think that's a time to consider it because it's such a fundamental active. Obviously, if you're thinking about an anti-aging program, you put daily sunscreen as a habit in first. But the next thing to consider would be the introduction of a retinoid. In terms of which one you go for, there are certain retinoids that just make it easier because I think when you start a retinoid, it's always really the beginning of a ladder. You're always thinking about, okay, what's the beginning percentage? When might I consider going up the percentage? What are my goals? So I always get people to sort of think about what the plan is. What's the intention here? Is it to boost radiance? Is it to control blemishes? And it's always quite a good idea to take a selfie at the beginning of your retinoid journey. It really does help, I think, to document things using photographs. So one of the easiest retinoids to start, I think, is the new generation retinoid called granactive retinoid. And it's been designed to interact with all the retinoid receptors, but it's just really well tolerated and it's less irritating than some of the earlier retinoid molecules that are available. I think when you start a retinoid the first time, you just have to expect that there might be a little bit of dryness on the journey, but that's to be expected. And to make life really simple, I always urge people who are doing this themselves to strip out all the other actives and just give all their attention to their retinoid because it becomes much easier then to manage any potential dryness because you know where it's coming from. So I suggest you start with something like a pea-sized amount and try using it every other night or even every third night, and then seeing where you get to after a couple of weeks. Now, I teach my patients to do something called the 13-dot technique, which sounds a bit bonkers, but it's a way of ensuring that people use a little amount everywhere rather than a whole lot, maybe just on their cheeks. So basically, it's 3 little dabs on the forehead, each cheek, the sides of the nose, and then 2 on the chin. It's 13 dots. And use that small amount every other night. And then you check in with yourself at 2 weeks. Is my skin comfortable? Am I using enough moisturizer? I urge people to think about using a moisturizer to really smooth the process. So you can happily apply a moisturizer before your retinoid to make it even gentler.
What would you suggest as a moisturizer to use on top of your retinols?
So it must be without any other irritating actives. So moisturizer with niacinamide is absolutely fine. A moisturizer with a mild AHA in there is not. So you want something simple, supportive, And ideally non-clogging. I believe in skincare kind of across the board being non-comedogenic, which means it won't aggravate your pores and block them up. You can choose a formula and a texture that you really like, but really all the focus and attention is on the retinoid. It can take up to sort of 4 to 6 weeks before you're using it every single day, but that's fine. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
And in terms of skin irritation, because I think that's the one thing people are terrified of, what's normal in terms of skin irritation and what's not? What are the signs that perhaps you've overdone it or you're not using it correctly or it's the wrong kind of retinol for you?
If you follow the simple guidance, so you use a non-foaming cleanser, you use a supportive moisturizer, you use your sunscreen, and then you just use the retinoid on its own. Signs that you might be kind of going too hard for your skin. It might be a little bit dry. It might feel a bit rough. You might even get some redness. But I think if you're careful with your technique and use a moisturizer to either buffer and apply it before you apply your retinoid to take the intensity down a bit. You can even layer it on top of the retinoid. So I call a retinoid sandwich. We've got moisturizer underneath and on top. Really lean into hydration. Oftentimes it's much easier and much more comfortable than people kind of initially think. And use the resources that we have. There's loads of influencers, people on Instagram who document their journey using this. So, tap into that resource, share your situation and don't be alone with it. Our Facebook group is full of really experienced retinoid users. And it's great whenever new people who join the group can rely on them for tips and guidance. So I think that's the great thing about the way information is being shared right now. You can do these things and it might seem a bit scary, but you can get a bit of hand holding along the way. And I think that makes it so much easier.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. That's all our questions for today. And I would absolutely love you to come back.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, Funmi.
And that's it for this week. My thanks to Jessica Davino, Dr. Sam Bunting, my brand partner, Paula's Choice, and you for listening to On Reflection.